Now, we are in Joshua chapter 8, which I titled Faith Restored. Oh, go back. For a reason, we'll see why that is as we get into the first couple of verses, as a matter of fact. But for those of you that take notes, this is how I've broken it down here. We are going to see war in verses 1 to 29. It's a big chunk. And in the last few verses 30 to 35, I titled Worship. So war and worship. And those two titles may seem like they are just so far apart from one another. Why would anybody have war and then worship? But we will see that the two are very intimately related and ought to be not only for the people of God then, but also for God's people now, which is you and I. Warfare and worship should go hand in hand. We're going to get into this first section here, which is war in verses 1 to 29, but I'll start by just bringing up something that you already know, and that is that when you have wronged somebody or you violated somebody, done something wrong maybe to a parent or a sibling or a friend or cousin, something like that, when you know that you've wronged somebody, that can be hard. You know, you might start to feel guilty, or at least hopefully you feel guilty about it. And then at some point, when you finally make amends, when you talk to that person, you say, you know, I am so sorry. Please forgive me for what I said or what I did. And when that other person that you wronged forgives you, they accept your apology and they say, okay, I will forgive you. And you start to move forward from that place of failure, and you start moving forward, leaving that behind. That is such a great feeling. I know that you all know that. No doubt there's been some point in your life where you had to come back and apologize to your mom or to your dad and say, please forgive me for having a bad attitude or saying this or doing this thing. And to know that, hey, everything's all right, it's going to be okay, I forgive you, let's move forward, is such a sweet feeling. No doubt Joshua and the children of Israel were experiencing that as Joshua chapter 8 opens up, because here in verses 1 and 2, as we're getting into this section on war, it starts with an assurance from the Lord, verses 1 and 2. Let's read it, and as usual, there's lots in here. It says, now the Lord said to Joshua. Okay, now keep in mind that this was a different time, and oftentimes God would speak to people. Now we do not know how exactly he was speaking to Joshua. Was he just audibly speaking to Joshua? When Moses was the leader, it was God who actually said, Moses and I, we talk to one another like friends. And so you get this picture that they would sit down, they would meet, and they would sit down and talk. And we go, well, how is that possible? Well, I do not understand all of it. But here, what we do understand is that God would speak to Joshua also. And here he is speaking to Joshua. And what he says to him is, do not be afraid. Now, when God speaks to us, it's possible that God could speak to us in many different ways. But primarily, God is going to speak to us through his word, which is that Bible that you've got on your lap. Because we have the Bible, God no longer needs to speak to us through prophets or through dreams or through visions. Not that he does not do that, not that he cannot do that, and not that he never does that to anybody, because he still may speak that way, but he primarily is going to speak to us through his word. And so you and I, when we are wanting to hear from God, we always want to make sure that we've got our Bibles and that we're reading through it and looking for God, listening for God, listening with our hearts for God to speak to us. Here he begins to speak to Joshua. And what he says to Joshua is absolutely fitting. He says, do not be afraid. Now, it's fitting, and we'll talk about why that is in just a moment, but it's also familiar. When we opened up to the first chapter of the book of Joshua, we found there that Joshua was told multiple times not to be afraid. Do not be afraid. Be courageous. Be very courageous. And he's been told that. Even the people told him, hey, do not be afraid, be courageous. We're going to be with you just like we were with Moses. If God is for you, man, we're going to be with you also. And so this is not something new. I would be willing to bet. I'm not a gambling person, but if I had some money and I was willing to bet, I would bet that Joshua was scared, probably oftentimes. Now that's strange because to us, Joshua seems like, well, Man, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. Joshua, he did this today. He's going to hold out a spear and lead the battle. And we feel like Joshua is, that he's this, bigger than life individual, but to keep in mind that he was a person. He was not superhuman. Here we see God telling him, do not be afraid. I would imagine that's because he was afraid. Why was he afraid? Well, it says in verse 1, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed. That's when your mind and your heart are chaotic, man. They're in they're just in the midst of a storm. Don't be dismayed. Take all the people of war with you, and arise, go up to what looks to be Ai, but we actually pronounce it Ai. It's the city of Ai. Now, again, some of you may not have been here for the previous studies, so let me just run it down for you real quickly. Joshua, when he was leading the people, first came into the land, and the first city that was destroyed was the city of Jericho. Now, in Jericho, as they were taking over the city, they were given specific instructions. Do not take anything out of the city. No gold, no silver, nothing. That's all to be taken and dedicated to the Lord. But there was a man named Achan. There's always one in the bunch, right? It's like you had one job. And Achan decided that he was going to take some gold, some silver, and some fancy clothes that he found. And he hid those. He stole those from the Lord. Those were supposed to be dedicated to the Lord. He stole those from the Lord. He hid them. Now what happened was, he did that in Jericho. When they went from Jericho to the city of Ai, and they were going to destroy the city of Ai, Joshua had no idea that Achan had stolen things, that he was disobedient. And he didn't consult the Lord. He was prideful, and he didn't say, hey, Lord, we're getting ready to go into Ai, and we need your help. Speak to us, because God would have said, well, before you go into Ai, you need to know that Achan stole something, and you need to deal with that. But because Joshua was like, we don't need to trust the Lord, let's trust the spies. Because he didn't trust the Lord, he didn't wait to listen to the Lord, and he just went on into Ai. Well, because there was sin among the people that they didn't know about, 36 of their soldiers, their military men from the children of Israel, died trying to attack Ai. And so they hightailed it. They ran out of Ai. And God said, hey, listen, Joshua, there's a problem. You went into Ai, and you didn't know that there was sin. But because of that sin, you guys got chased out of Ai. They dealt with the sin. Now they're getting ready to go back into Ai. But as you can imagine, that would be a little unnerving. In other words, I'm getting ready. The last time we were here, we lost 36 people. And now we're getting ready to go back in. So you can imagine that would be a little bit scary. You're going back in for the second time. There was a defeat there the first time. You feel like you just really fell flat on your face, and oh man, I really blew it. And now you're getting ready to go back in. And so Joshua was probably a little hesitant. That happens in the life of faith. Sometimes in the life of faith, we fail to really operate or follow God by faith. That's what happened in Jericho. They, or as they were going into Ai, but in that in-between time, they weren't following God. They had followed God into Jericho, but didn't follow God leaving Jericho and going into Ai. And so now there's this lapse of faith here, and they paid a high price for it. And so now as they're getting ready to go back in, God comes, and I love this. He gives assurance to Joshua. And by giving it to Joshua, he gives it to the people also. But he assures them, hey, no, really, it's okay. Don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. Here's the plan. And I love that. I love that from God. He's gentle. He's loving. And he assures and he reassures us and says, no, it's going to be okay. You follow me, and I'm going to lead you into victory. Now, it goes on to say in the rest of verse 1, look what he says. See, I have given. So he gives him the reason not to be afraid. He says, do not be afraid, do not be dismayed. And we go, well, why? Why wouldn't I be? 36 people died last time we were here. Why should I not be afraid? He says, I'm glad you asked. He says, see, I have given, and it's past tense. I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. It's all yours. So God is assuring him and reassuring him and giving him a reason not to be afraid. And I love that. I need a reason not to be afraid, right? You've just finished watching a scary movie. And it's late at night, the rest of your family's in bed, and you're getting ready to go to bed, but you totally forgot that you were supposed to take the trash out. And now, you've got to take it out to the trash can, but the trash can's on the side of the house. The side of the house is dark. And whatever scary movie you were just watching, whatever monster was in there, whatever axe murderer was in there, is now in the dark on the side of your house, right? You know that, and you know that you can't possibly go out there. And you need some assurance and some reassurance. Now, that assurance in that moment might come from, maybe a brother or sister, sibling, like, hey, could you please walk with me out to the trash can? And, then you have to endure their teasing because they make fun of you because I told you not to be watching those scary movies. And now here you are, scared of the trash can or whatever. It might come, you might get some assurance from, it might come in the way of imagining mom or dad in the morning when they wake up and see that the trash is still there. And you're like, let's see, go outside to the dark and face that monster from that movie that I just watched, or face mom or dad. I'll face the monster, right? Because there's a really good chance that it's make-believe, Lord. But mom and dad are not make-believe. And when they wake up, I'm going to be in trouble. I got to get out there. And so God gives his people assurance and reassurance, and I love this. I've given it into your hand. It's already a done deal. We have promises like this for you and I as Christians. The Bible says, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Meaning that if God began a good work in your life, that he is going to finish that work. That means there's no chance that he started to work in you, and then he looks at you and goes, easy? I don't know. I don't think there's any more hope. I'm giving up. He doesn't do that. He doesn't look at you and go, hey, you know what, Chris, I started to work in you many years ago, but you're just not really progressing the way I want you to. I'm abandoning the work. He doesn't do that. Whatever work he started in you, he will be faithful to complete it. It's a done deal. He knows what he's doing, and he's going to finish. He's faithful. And so he promises Joshua here, he assures him, look, the battle is yours, man. I've given it into your hand. The king, the people, the city, the land, everything, it's complete. And note that in God's plan, it's complete. He didn't leave anything out. I've given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, but I'm not giving you his land yet. He didn't do that. He says it's all yours. It's a matter of now moving by faith, following God. It says in verse 2, and you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil, now look at this, only its spoil and its cattle you shall take as booty. Booty for yourselves. That means treasure. Lay an ambush for the city behind him. We'll get to that last part in just a moment. But he promises him, you're going to do the same thing that you did to Jericho. In other words, you're going to totally destroy them. The city, everything. You're going to do the same thing to Ai. But note what happens in verse 2. Now, in Jericho, they were told, do not take any treasure for yourself. Leave it. Once the majority, now Achan was disobedient, but everybody else was obedient. And they did not take those treasures, or as it calls here, the booty or the spoil, the gold, the silver, the fancy clothes, the whatever, all of that stuff. They left it alone in the first city, Jericho. The majority of the people did. So now they are rewarded for their obedience in Jericho, leaving those things alone. Now they're rewarded with being able to take whatever they can carry. That's how God oftentimes operates. Just leave it alone until God tells you that it's time. Let me put this in terms that you will understand. Now, I used to be young. I used to be high school age. At one time in my life, I was a freshman. I was a sophomore, I was a junior, I was a senior. I was in high school. Okay? It was in the 1900s. And I went to school on a covered wagon with horses, a team of mules. No, I didn't do that. Okay? I went in a car, but it was a long time ago. So when I say what I'm about to say, I'm speaking from experience. I understand. I'm speaking to a room full of high school students. And there's guy and girl stuff all over the place. Because you got a group of high school students. It's just, there's guy and girl stuff. Now you might be going, no, there's no guy and girl stuff in my life, and that's fine. Some of you you're not doing the guy and girl stuff, maybe because mom said not to, or because for whatever reason. But some of you are. Some of you want to do the guy and girl stuff, but mom and dad are like, nah, whatever. But all of the feelings, all of it's there, all of the thoughts and all of the, all of these things. Well, you need to learn an important lesson, and it is this. Don't force it. Just wait for the Lord. I know you hear that all the time. Same thing my mom and dad told me, Same thing my last youth pastor told me, man. I thought you were going to, tell me something new. No, just wait for the Lord. You don't want to be like Achan, who was told, leave that stuff alone. And then he forced it. Took what he wanted and paid the price for it. And not only did he pay the price for it, but his family paid the price for it. His belongings, his animals, and 36 other people paid the price for it. Instead, what you want to do is be like the rest of these people and wait. Don't force it. And then what you will find is that when God is ready, he's going to bless you with that thing. Understand? So in the realm of guys and girls and boyfriends and girlfriends, you may feel like, no, I need me one of those to make life complete, man. And you might look around and go, no, everybody's got them, man. Like, look at him. He looks so happy with his. And look at her. She looks so happy with hers. And you might feel like, no, I need me one of those. But you might be forcing the issue. Wait for God to do it, to provide. You don't want to go out there fighting for something that you're not supposed to have, because you might get it and find out that what you got looks like it's been fought with. You don't want to do that. You want to just wait on the Lord and let the Lord bring it to you when he's ready. That's always the best way. Let me just wait for God. I'm not going to stick my hand in there and do something I'm not supposed to be doing. Let me just wait for the Lord. And that's what these people did. And look at this in verse 2. Only its spoil. That means the treasures. And its cattle you shall take as treasures for yourself. And then notice at the end of verse 2, he tells them, lay an ambush for the city behind it. So he gives them, we just get a little glimpse right there. God gives them some instructions on how to fight. He says, lay an ambush behind the city. Okay? Now, we move on, and that takes us right into the next sub point, which is an ambush is set in verses 3 through 13. This is a narrative. It's a story. That's what that means, a narrative. So we're just going to read through the story here. It says, so Joshua arose, and all the people of war to go up against Ai. And Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night. And he commanded them, saying, here's the instructions. He's a good leader. He gives instructions. He said, behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city. In other words, facing the city, but behind the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. Then I, Joshua says, and all the people who are with me will approach the city, and it will come about, or it will happen, when they come out against us as at the first, that we shall flee before them. Okay, so let me tell you the first part of this plan, the ambush. He sets up people. He tells the soldiers, you're going to go behind the city. You're going to hide back there. Okay, don't get too close. Don't get too far. He says, I, talking about himself, and I like that about Joshua. He's like, wherever I'm telling you to go, I'm going to go myself. So he says, I'm going to take the rest of the military, the soldiers, and we're going to come from the front of the city. And when the people in the city see us, they're going to come out chasing us. Now, why would they chase Joshua and the children of Israel? Well, because they did it the first time. Remember, they chased them out of the city, and they killed 36 of their soldiers. So when they see them coming a second time, they're going to be like, oh, they want another piece, man. Let's just go. Let's go finish them off. And they're going to empty the city and chase after Joshua and the children of Israel. And Joshua says, we're going to turn around and we're going to run. That's what he says in verse 5. He says that at the very end of verse 5, that we shall flee before them. We're going to turn around and run. Okay? In verse 6, for they will come out after us till we have drawn them from the city. For they will say, they're fleeing before us as at the first, like the first time. Therefore, we will flee before them. We're going to take off running. Then you shall arise, in verse 7, from the ambush and seize the city. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. Now, I like God assured Joshua. Joshua is assuring the people. And the people know that God's with Joshua. Okay? So everybody's getting assurance here. Verse 8, and it will be, when you have taken the city, that you shall set the city on fire. According to the commandment of the Lord you shall do. So do it. This is what God told us to do. See, I have commanded you. So he's saying, God commanded me, so I'm commanding you. Same thing. Verse 9. Joshua therefore sent them out. And they went to lie in ambush and stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Joshua lodged that night among the people. So there's the leader. He says, we're preparing for battle. I'm going to sleep where you guys are sleeping. Let's go. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning, verse 10, and mustered, that means he gathered all the people together, and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people of Ai. So they get up early in the morning, gather everybody, and they go stand in front of Ai, the city of Ai. Verse 11, and all the people of war who were with him went up and drew near. They got close. And they came before the city and camped on the north side of Ai. Now a valley lay between them and Ai. But the point is that where Joshua's at, where he's gathered all the people, now you've got the secret army that's there behind the city. But now Joshua walks up to the front and he's got the rest of the people. And when the people from Ai look over their wall and they're like, hey, who's out there? And they go, oh, it's Joshua and the Israelites again. And they would see them. And so all of their attention would be focused out in front of them. Okay? Now, we get the idea. We know what's going to happen, but let's read on. And so it says in verse 12, so he took about 5,000 men and sent them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And when they had set the people, all the army that was on the north of the city, they're with Joshua, and its rear guard on the west of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. So Joshua goes out that night, goes out to the middle of the valley, presents himself like, hey, we're out here. Like, we out here, right? He's like, man, this is us. Now, in verse 14, this ambush that is set then turns into a successful ambush, or the ambush is successful. So, verse 14, now it happened when the king of Ai saw it, that the men of the city hurried and rose early and went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at an appointed place before the plain. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. So the king of Ai wakes up, he sees all the people out there, and he goes, oh, let's go eliminate these fools right away, first thing in the morning. Okay? Like, let's go take care of them right now. Okay? Because he's already confident. He knows that, man, we did it before. We killed 36 of their soldiers. We can certainly do it again. Let's go. Verse 15. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them and fled by way of the wilderness. In other words, Joshua and all of his people, pretending that they were being, that they were scared, they take off running away. Verse 16, so all the people who were in Ai were called together to pursue them. So all the people from inside the city is like, hey, everybody, let's go chase the Israelites. And they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Verse 17, there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So they left the city open and pursued Israel. The plan is going according to plan. Then the Lord said to Joshua in verse 18, Stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. Now, let's pause there for a moment because there's something that an important point that I need to make. And just so you understand, real quickly, Joshua and whatever soldiers were with him, they went to the front of the city, and it was like, hey, here we are. We're getting ready to fight with you guys. The king of Ai and everybody that was in that city, they got excited. Hey, we can kill these fools. Let's go. And they go running out of the city, chasing them. Joshua's like, okay, let's get out of here. And they all take off running. Now everybody from Ai left the city, and they're now chasing Joshua and the rest of the children of Israel. Okay? Obviously, what's about to happen is that the soldiers that are camped out behind the city, they're going to have free reign. They're going to come, they got free entry into the city. So we'll see that in just a minute. But I want you to note how that happens. Verse 18. Then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. Now, God had already previously explained to Joshua, the city is yours. The victory is yours. We've already got it all planned out. It's going to happen. However, what he what he did not tell Joshua was exactly how or when that would happen. Joshua, as we see here in verse 18, was going to get that information in the midst of the battle. In the midst of the activity, then Joshua gets the next bit of information. This is characteristic of how the life of faith operates. You and I are living by faith. We're following God by faith. But God has not given you the plan for the rest of your life. Like, this is what you're going to do for the next 20 years, and here's how it's going to work out. We like the plan way ahead of time. Some of us are planners. I'm not a planner. I'm a last-minute person. I'm a procrastinator, not a planner. Some of us are planners. And if you're going on vacation, if your mom or your dad says, you know what, we're really thinking about going on vacation next summer. Like, you're all about it. When are we going? Where are we going to? What should I pack? How much money should I bring? Where are we staying? How are we getting there? What are we going to eat? Some of you are like, I'm going to start planning right now. And then there are those of you that are like me, like, next summer, I might not even be alive by then. And if I am, I'll pack the night before. And some of you are like that. Joshua is running away from the people of Ai. He's doing exactly what God told him to do. He's doing that by faith. By faith, he's running away. That's what God told him to do. He doesn't know when he's supposed to turn around and destroy the city of Ai. All he knows, all God told him was, you need to set an ambush and you need to run away. So as Joshua activates his faith, man, he trusts God, he believes God, and he starts running away, then in the midst of that, then God speaks to him and gives him step 2. But see, some of us, we don't like that. We go, man, God, just tell me, like, what do you want me to do for the next 50 years? But here's the thing. If God were to tell us what he was going to do for the next 50 years, some of us might be terrified and go, no, I'm not doing that. Many years ago, just so you know, I was not born a youth pastor. Okay? I got saved when I was 20. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My parents got saved when I was in high school. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. So I was not born a youth pastor. Many years ago, I got saved, and the little church that I was going to would have work days occasionally. They say, hey, we're going to have work day. And I would show up for the work day. And I would do whatever they wanted me to do. Sweep, vacuum, clean toilets, plunge the toilets, paint the bathroom walls. I would do whatever, dust, whatever they wanted me to do. pull weeds from outside. And that was fun. I was like, man, this is really cool. I work my job and I volunteer for a little bit at church, and this is good stuff. Man, it's a good life. Well, then after a while of just doing that and showing up faithfully to do that, they said, hey, Chris, we'd really like it. We need someone to work the little soundboard in the little room there for service, and then just we need you to hit record on the cassette tape. So that I know it was in the 1900s. I told you, cassette tapes, and so they said, okay, we want you to. And I said, okay, yeah, sure, I could do that. So I did that. I just go in every Sunday, and they had a Spanish service first. I don't speak Spanish, but Spanish service, and I would just hit record and just do my thing. And that's fine. And I thought, man, this is wonderful. I'll just, I'll record and then I'll show up occasionally for the work days, and then I'll just work my regular job and volunteer. Man, God, this is fantastic. I was an absolute dirtbag when I got saved. So the fact that I could serve God in any capacity was like, oh, this is great. God's letting me serve. Well, then after doing that for a while, the pastor approached me and said, hey, Kenny, the youth leader, he just got a new job. And so he can't teach the youth for a little while, for like a few weeks. He needs to get his schedule settled. So would you mind teaching the youth? And I was like, man, I can clean toilets and I can hit record on the cassette deck, but I don't really know nothing about teaching, but I guess so. I guess I can. And the things that there was, anyways. I was supposed to do that for 3 or 4 weeks. Kenny was like, nah, I'm outie. And he split. I ended up doing it for 4 years. I never did forgive Kenny for not coming back. I was like, what, what? At the end of that 4 years, God was moving me, and I left there, and I went to Calvary Chapel San Bernardino. And I was like, man, Calvary Chapel San Bernardino. There was this pastor there at the time. His name was John Miller, and he was the pastor there. And I got in there and I was like, man, this man can teach. And so I decided, I'm not serving. I'm done serving. I'm just going to listen to Bible studies. It just so happened that I knew the youth pastor there. His name was Jason. And Jason's like, hey, what are you doing here? I said, well, I come here now. I'm not going to the other church anymore. I'm here. He goes, oh, that's funny. My junior high leader just left. I was like, what does that have to do with me? And he said, what do you think about teaching just 2 Thursday nights? Because their youth group was on Thursday night. And you know what I did? Being the godly man that I was and being a super Christian, I hit him with some Christianese. I said, I'm going to pray about that. You know what that means, right? That means, nah. That's what that means. And I was just like, and I'm telling you, I did pray about it, but in my heart, my mind, I was like, nah. But I said, I'll pray about that, right? And I did. But I had a hard heart. And I was like, God, I really don't want to serve your people right now. And I'd rather just come and listen to John Miller teach the Bible, because that's really, really cool. And I said, but, Lord, if you prompt Jason to come and ask me again about it, then I'll know it's from you, and I'll do it. I'll do the two Thursday nights. And wouldn't you know it, Pastor Jason came like, hey, and some of you know Pastor Jason. He's like, dude, you gonna teach? It's like, yeah, I'll teach. Yeah, I'll do 2 Thursdays. At the end of the 2 Thursdays, I said, Jason, shook his hand, thank you very much for the opportunity. TTYL, buddy. And he said, what do you think about teaching 2 more Thursdays? And I felt it. I knew that God was fishing, and God was like reeling me in. I could feel the tug. And I was just like a fish. Like, I didn't want to get caught. I didn't want to go. But the hook was in, and it was like, and I said, all right, that's fine. I'll do 2 more Thursdays. At the end of the 2 more Thursdays, now this is already a month, I said, Jason, thank you very much. God bless you. He said, hey, we're having a leaders meeting on Sunday. Could you come to that? It's like, I was just like, all right, fine, God. I didn't want to fight God anymore. I was like, that's fine. All right, let's go. Then I'm working a job. I'm volunteering with the junior high group. Everything is fantastic. Things started to change at work. It was getting harder to be at church. I'm praying. One day, I pull up to church on a weekday. It was my day off. I was there to pick up my wife because women study, and we only had one car, so I was there. And then Pastor Tom comes out of the church office. Pastor Tom and I get along real well. He comes, and I'm just out there waiting. He comes in, and he just gets into doesn't ask, he just gets into my car and sits down in the passenger seat. I had a little Volkswagen, a little orange GTI with a sunroof. It was stick shift. And I used to leave Ukaipa, man, and just come down Green Spot Road like I was IndyCar. I used to love that little car. I'm sitting in my car, and he gets in, and he's like, "Oh, it's a pretty cool car." It's like, okay, yeah, but why are you in my car? Like, what are you, And he goes, "Hey, you want a job?" I'm like, "Dude, I already got a job." He goes, "Well, I'll give you a job here, and we'll pay you the same thing that you're getting paid right now." It was like, I could feel like, God was reeling me in, And it was like, well, I guess so. Things have changed at work. They're making me miss church. Like, it seems like this is where God is leading. And sure enough, that's where God was leading. So then I got a job. They hired me as a janitor, custodian, maintenance person. And so now I'm working at the church, but I'm volunteering my time with the junior high. Everything is good. I go to work during the day, listen to my Walkman with cassettes, music, Bible studies, whatever, clean toilets, vacuum. Life is good, man. Like, this is great. I just volunteer with the junior high. I'm no pastor, so if there's some kind of trouble, I'll just be like, "You can go talk to Jason, because I'm not the pastor," right? I don't know, I'm just a janitor. And then, wouldn't you know it, man, Jason, I thought that this man was my friend. And he came and told me after a few years, "Dude, we're leaving." What does that have to do with me, I thought. And he's like, "You're going to take my spot. You're going to be the next pastor, the next youth pastor." I was like, "Man, are you kidding me right now? You serious?" And that's exactly what happened. He left. And then they said, "Well," Pastor John was like, "You take his position." I still haven't forgiven Jason for leaving. Why would you do that to me? I tell him and his wife now, his wife Chris, like, "I can't believe you guys did that to me, man. Why would you do that to me?" Reeled me in and then just left. God works one step at a time. He's got all the steps planned out, but he's giving you and I one step at a time. Now, you're young, and you want to know, like, what does the Lord have in store for me? And Lord, could you just give me the 50-year plan, please? No, he's not going to do that. That's not how he operates. If he did that, it would terrify us. If God were to say to me when I was 20 years old, "Hey, man, I'm glad that you're saved. Listen, you're going to be a youth pastor years from now," I would have been like, "No, I'm out. I don't want to do that. That's scary. It's scary." God didn't do that. He did one step at a time. And Joshua is in the midst of this plan, man, and he's doing his part. He's running away. And then God, all of a sudden, in the midst of that, in the midst of Joshua's obedience, then God says, "Okay, stop, turn around, point that spear back in the opposite direction." Joshua's being obedient. What does Joshua do? It says in verse 18, "And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city." Very dramatic, but he did exactly what God wanted him to do. Now, I want you to, we're kind of tainted by movies in Hollywood. So this military leader stopping as he's being chased, turning around toward the city, and with his spear pointing at the city very dramatically, that's nothing new. We go, "Oh, they did that in Gladiator. They did that in 300. They did that in, whatever movie. And, oh yeah, it's very, very dramatic. But he's supposed to be running. And now all of a sudden he's got to stop, turn around. And this is not a movie. This is like actually happening. And he has to point toward the city. And it may seem silly. And it may be that God is getting ready to give you the next step. But he may have you do something that you feel like, "Oh, God, this is kind of embarrassing. I don't want to stand here in the middle of a field with my spear pointed out. But I would be willing to argue that until Joshua turned and pointed his spear toward that city was not going to be theirs yet. That was the next step. He had to do that. That's what God told him to do. And Joshua, no hesitation on his part. And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. You and I have got to be willing to do whatever it is that God is wanting us to do. You want to move on and move up? You want to grow stronger in the Lord? Then you have got to do the things that he's telling you and I to do. And if you're not willing to do those things, then do not expect to go on to the next step or the next level. You can't move on or move up. You and I must be obedient to the things that he's telling us to do now. When we're obedient to those, then he will move us on to other things. And you may say, man, I'm just a custodian, janitor. No, God's got something else planned, but you got to be obedient to that. And then he'll move you on. And then he'll move you on and move you on. That's tough. Because you and I, man, we're like, nah, God, like I got a plan, God. Like I came up with a plan. I'm going to do real well in high school. I'm going to go to college, to this such college. I'm going to get a job, man, that makes me a bunch of money. And then I'm going to get me, then I'm going to go and get me a family, a really good-looking wife or husband, and I'm going to get me a really good-looking house and a really good-looking dog and a really good-looking car. And then, Lord, I'm just going to be rich, and I'm going to vacation and go on my boat, and I'm going to do all these things. And so, Lord, I've got the plan. Can you just bless it? No. That's not the way God works. God gives you the plan step by step. Is it difficult? Yeah, it's difficult. Because sometimes you feel like you're just running. Like, I'm just running endlessly. Like, God, you told me to do this. Now I'm doing it. And when is it going to change? You don't have to worry about that. It's easy. You don't have to worry about that. All you do is just be obedient to the Lord. Be content with that. And then when he's ready, he'll say, okay, now it's time to turn and point your spear in the other direction. Here we go. We're heading in the other direction now. That's all you got. It really is. In a sense, it is simple. I realize that it's hard because you're kind of like, well, where's God at and what's he doing? Where am I? Where should I be going or whatever? Look, just all you got to do right now, you're a student. You know that you have to finish high school, so just be faithful to do that. As college draws closer, maybe it's college, maybe it's work, whatever, you're just praying and asking the Lord, help me to be faithful, with what I'm doing now, and then just guide me in the future. God will be faithful. He'll open up the doors. Once you do that, then you'll go on to the next step. Once you do that, you'll go on to the next step. But you and I have to learn how to be obedient in the present. We've got to be obedient right now. I'm not trying to be obedient 10 steps from now. Just right now. Just right now. So he stretches out his hand, and then what happens in verse 19? So those in ambush rose quickly out of their place. They ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered the city and took it and hurried to set the city on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended to heaven. So they had no power to flee this way or that way, and the people who had fled into the wilderness turned back on the pursuers. And now in verse 21, now when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. So they literally got the smoke, right? They were now, the tables have turned, the ambush is set, and now the people of Ai are caught in between. What is this? This is classic divide and conquer. Joshua drew the people out, then his other people came into the city and took over it, and now the people of Ai are like, where are we? They're divided. Now they don't have a city, they don't have a home base, they're caught out, and now they're sandwiched in between this army, and they are completely destroyed. In verse 23, I'm sorry. I just skipped, didn't I? Got all excited and skipped. Verses 22 to 29, all Ai destroyed. Then the others came out of the city against them, so they were caught in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that side, and they struck them down so that they let none of them remain or escape. But the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua. And it came to pass when Israel had made an end of slaying all the inhabitants of Ai in the field, in the wilderness, where they pursued them, and when they all had fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, that all the Israelites returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. So it was that all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as booty, or treasure for themselves, according to the word of the Lord which he had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever, a desolation to this day. And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until evening. And as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his corpse down from the tree, cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raise over it a great heap of stones that remains to this day. Now let me answer something real quickly before we finish this off, and it is this, that this is a point of contention for critics of the Bible. They say, why would God command the killing of not only the men but also the women? And we saw in Jericho that they also killed the children. And that's like, what is that all about? Well, for those of you that have not been here, we've studied through all of the people in the land prior to today. And you need to know, and I'll give you some extreme, these are extreme examples, but this did happen. And you can go fact check this if you want. In fact, I encourage you to. But the land, the Jericho or Ai and the rest of that land, these people were involved in some horrible things. Their worship included, at some points, burning their own children alive. You don't believe me? Check for yourself. The land of Canaan, the Canaanite idolatry. It also involved, their worship also involved sex of everything imaginable and unimaginable. Men and men, women and women, men and women, groups, kids, animals, nothing was off limits. So when it says that they destroyed the men and the women, and when you read in Jericho they destroyed the kids, you feel like, oh man, come on, what's the deal? No, you do not understand how wicked these cities were. Now, you need to understand this. God is the creator. He therefore, by virtue of being the creator, I'm telling you this in case anybody ever asks you this, because this is a normal one that people bring up. Well, in the Old Testament, God had everybody killed. Well, number one, God is a creator, and he can do what he wants or needs to with his creation. Okay, I used this example last week. If you take a ceramics class in high school and you make something out of clay, and then you don't like it, you can crush that thing, throw it away, start over. Well, God is the creator. He can do as he needs to with his creation, and these people were part of his creation. Okay. The other thing is this. Everything, I'm going to give you an example. I shouldn't say everything. Much of what you and I do is because of our parents. It is very possible that some of you had to be pushed and prodded to get to church, to be here right now. Because if it was up to you, if your parents said, go or don't go, it's up to you, some of us would have been like, nah, stay in bed. But you're here because this is what you do, because this is what your parents are teaching you, because they're leading you. That's how it goes. But there is going to come a day in your life. You remember this, okay? If you're taking notes, you can write it down. If you're not taking notes, just lock it in your mind. One of these days, you're going to terrify yourself. It's going to pop up, and you're going to terrify yourself. You say, what? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to say something, and it is going to be the same exact phrase or word or the way that your mom or your dad would say it to you. And you're going to be like, oh, I'm turning into my mom. I'm turning into my dad. Because they raised you. They have influenced you. They've taught you how to do things. Now, you're learning your own style and how to do things. And, there's some differences between you and your parents, but you're going to see the older that you get, you're going to realize, man, they really had a profound effect on me. I bring all that up because whatever the parents were doing in the children were learning. And if the children were left, they would grow up and do the same thing that their parents had taught them. And the worship and all of its filthiness would continue. So God, in wanting to start over brand new completely, he said everybody's got to be wiped out. Everybody. so that he can start brand new. You know, whatever is planted is going to grow. And when there are roots, man, something's going to pop up. That's what things do. They grow roots, life pops up. And if those little kids had that sin rooted inside of them, it was going to pop up again. And they would either then carry on what their parents were doing, sacrificing children, and all of the sexual nasty stuff that went along with their worship, or they were going to be problematic to the children of Israel later on. And so God, knowing that, and him being the creator, he says, no, they need to all be eliminated. So we can say, oh, that's not right, and whatever. He's God. He can do it if he needs to. And that's what he did. We may not think it's fair, and that's okay. You don't have to think it's fair. You don't even have to like it. But as long as you understand, well, it's God, and he can do as he pleases. Now, we finish with the last few verses, which is the worship. What warfare and worship? Well, verse 30 tells us, and verses 30 and 31 tells us that Joshua at this point, or after this, he builds an altar. And it says, now Joshua built an altar of the Lord, or to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses. That means the word of God. An altar of whole stones, over which no man has wielded an iron tool. In other words, just gather stones and make an altar. It's not to be fancy, because if it's fancy, people will worship the altar. We don't want that. He says, and they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. So after the war, they take this little trek. It's believed it was about 30 miles away. And Joshua builds an altar, and then they actually sacrifice to God on that altar. And then in verses 32 down to verse 35, we read that the law was also included. And there in the presence of the children of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. Then all Israel, with their elders and officers and judges, stood on either side of the ark before the priests, the Levites, who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, the stranger as well as he who was born among them. I like that. Even strange people were welcomed in the presence of God. Isn't that neat? Because sometimes you feel strange, right? Right now, everybody's transitioning, whether it's into high school or into 10th or 11th or into 12th, or you're leaving 12th, and there's transitioning time happening for everybody. And you get into a new, you transition, and then you always feel like a little awkward, a little strange, like whatever. And you might feel like, I'm not really welcomed in this group or with these friends anymore or on this team or whatever. And maybe that's true. But even if you're strange, God accepts you. And here, it wasn't just people that were born into the Israelite families, but it was even those who said, hey, we're not Israelites, but we want to worship the Lord. And he goes on in verse 33 to say, half of them were in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women, the little ones, and the strangers who were living among them. So what he did was, at the end of this, they go back and they worship the Lord for the victory that they had just received in Ai. They worshiped him with sacrifice, and then they read the word of God and reminded themselves, oh, that's right, here's what we're supposed to be obedient to. So we messed up before, leaving Jericho, going into Ai. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's remember what God's word says, and let's move forward understanding, and we'll move forward by faith. Father, thank you so much for this morning.